Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and today's episode is called The Alien Clown Connection. Yeah, I know that sounds weird, but I keep running across cases in which ETs are apparently dressed up as clowns. This happens mostly with children, but it's definitely consistent. I'm certainly not the only researcher who has run across cases like these. There are many others. This may be related to the phenomena of screen memories, or maybe even a little bit more than that. It could be that these ETs are actually physically dressing up this way, and not only as clowns, but as a number of other disguises as well. So let's just take a look at some of these cases. Bud Hopkins certainly has run across this phenomena. As he says, and I'm quoting here, I have encountered at least 5 abductees with the same dread fear of clowns, in every case dating from childhood. Most cite clowns' scary, exaggerated eyes and mask-like painted faces. It would seem that for some abductees, seeing the natural human physical body and/or face, stylized or distorted, triggers memories of the alien's non-human appearance. And he actually quotes one of the cases that he found with this, as he says, this is the witness actually talking, I have my little idiosyncrasies. As a matter of fact, the only thing that used to scare me as a child that I didn't like is clowns. I think I didn't like anything staring at me, and I just don't like clown faces. Julia has clowns all over and I don't like them. I just never liked them. So Hopkins is saying here that it's the clown's appearance that reminds abductees of their own ET encounters. But I actually think it goes deeper than that, because there are many cases in which ETs have actually appeared as clowns. In fact, Raymond Fowler has a case from a lady he calls Jean. And as Fowler writes, Raymond Fowler, we found that Jean had gone through what seemed like a conditioning process conducted by the alien entities. From time to time, an entity would show itself to her and then disappear. However, it seemed to be dressed in some sort of costume or mask. Jean later would compare the outfit to that of a clown. It dressed so ridiculously that had Jean reported it, no one would have believed her. Jean believed the one who initially came was the same gray ET, but disguised in a clown-like costume and wig. And Raymond Fowler actually quotes Jean directly, as Jean herself says, he has a big head, but it's like a monster or something, like something white on him or teeth or some long thing, like funny hair or something. I don't know, like a clown or something. So as we can see, Bud Hopkins and Raymond Fowler both have run across cases like these. Raymond Fowler speculates that the ET dressed as a clown to sort of invalidate the abductee's experience, make it seem so ridiculous and outlandish that no one would ever believe her. But I'm thinking there might be actually another reason. But these cases are very strange and they reach very bizarre levels. There's an English researcher, Peter Huff, who has investigated several abduction cases, and he's run into this phenomena as well. He certainly talks quite a bit about how people fear clowns in our society. The fear of clowns is fairly widespread. It's called coulrophobia, and a lot of people have a deathly fear of clowns. And Huff points out, how saturated our culture is with the idea of evil clowns. Everything from the Joker in the Batman series, John Wayne Gacy, of course, the convicted murderer dressed up as Pogo the Clown. There is, of course, the film and novel by Stephen King, It, the killer clown, and definitely movies about clowns, even clowns from outer space. So this is a motif, a theme that runs through our culture and may in fact have its origins in this bizarre phenomena where ETs dress up as clowns and show themselves to little kids. Huff cites one case from the 1960s, this is in England, where two children, Stephanie and Janice, who apparently may have been having encounters, were outside their home playing with other children, and there was this row of abandoned houses and buildings that the children would often play in, and Stephanie and Janice were exploring one of these homes when they saw something very, very strange. And it was this floating sort of clown costume. And I'll just quote Peter Huff here directly. The room was black with mildew, and yet in the midst of all the decay, the costume hung like a sparkling jewel. A tomato red satin costume with white spots and filly cuffs, ankle and collar. Suspended by a loop was a clown's hat with a white pom-pom sewn on the top. The girls stepped over the threshold into the room. So they're staring at this perfectly clean, spotless clown costume in a place where it absolutely cannot be. These are abandoned buildings, and yet here's this brand new looking clown costume. So one of the girls steps up and she decides she's going to try and touch this thing. Stephanie is the one who tries and touch it. And as Stephanie says, and I'm quoting, "All the while I was conscious of Janice standing behind me. I stretched out my hand, and as I did so, the costume shimmered." So this freaked them out and they ran off because this costume was not physical. It appeared to be some sort of hologram or something. This is certainly what Peter Huff speculates. And honestly, we don't know because the witnesses left. What is interesting about this case is following this incident, one of the witnesses became obsessed with clowns and began collecting those little ceramic clown dolls that are really popular. They're called Perot dolls, and they have this sort of white ceramic face with large dark eyes, which does look a lot like, how people describe ETs. So he speculates perhaps that in this case, the ETs were using the clown suit as bait to lure children. And he has another case that speaks towards this. This other case, again, is from Peter Huff. In this case, the witness, her name is Abigail. She's a little girl and was having encounters as a very young child. One evening she was staying at her grandparents' house when she woke up to see a very strange figure standing next to her bedside. As she says, and I'm quoting her, "It's white with very, very blue eyes. Its face is painted. Some sort of clown with a big grin. It's horrible. I hate it." And this is not the only time she's seen this figure. It came to her several times, each time dressed up in this weird clown costume, complete with, makeup and this sort of shimmery, reflective material. And as Peter Huff says, he, the alien, tried to entice Abigail by telling her she would meet other children, just as Pennywise, the clown entity in Stephen King's novel It, used colorful balloons to entice his young victims down the storm drain. So there are many cases like this. Here's an anonymous case from a lady who posted her experience on the web, hoping to get other witnesses. And she had this experience when she was very young, and I'll just quote her directly. As the anonymous witness says, "When I was very young, I was supposed to be in bed while my parents hosted a holiday party. I don't recall having any particular fear of things in the night, darkness, being alone, until that night. The way my bedroom was situated, you could look directly through my door and through the window in a bedroom across the hallway. Something woke me up, and I saw an eerie white head or face staring at me through the window. I remember being terrified and thinking I heard some kind of scratching noise. So she ran away and ran down into the party. Her mom let her stay up. And ever since then, she's had this sort of dread fear of this window and can't even look out this particular window because she's afraid she's going to see some kind of face. And she's now 39 years old, or at least when she posted this account. And the reason she posted it is this. As she says, and again I'm quoting, "I have taken great pains to keep my son, now 13, away from all the UFO hype. It has terrified me most of my life, and I didn't want that for him. So he has not been fed anything. My husband believes it borders on evil, so things of this nature are never discussed in my home. When my son was about 2, he would tell me about clowns in the window. The first time I heard it, it gave me chills. He would tell me in detail about them and still remembers thinking he saw them, even trying to get in. We are very strict about TV in our house. We don't watch horror stuff. I didn't even allow my son to watch Power Rangers until past the age when most kids were watching." So where did he come up with this is her question. And what really shocked her is there was another account within her family. She had one of her stepsons, who's now 25, suddenly start joking around the dinner table about how he, as a kid, would see this white face, this white head staring at him in the night, and he could hear this weird scratching noise. So this really freaked the witness out, and she posted this on the web, looking for other people who may have had similar stories. And I have to tell you, there are similar stories out there. Here's a case which comes from MUFON. This occurred to a little girl she's 15 years old. This is in Goshen, New York, occurred around July 1968. And she woke up one evening and she saw what she thought were children out in the backyard, little short figures. And she was in bed looking through the window, and suddenly these figures came zooming towards her, and the next thing she knows, they're in her bedroom. They must have come through the wall, through the closed window or something. The window was not open, so she's freaking out. She's now unable to move, and these figures are surrounding her bed, physically examining her. And they have some kind of instrument which allows them to see all of her body organs, her interior vital organs, in full living color. This is something I've heard many times before from other experiencers. So this is what she's describing. And the ETs, I believe they were ETs, so does she at this point, they tell her that there's something wrong with one of her ovaries. Mind you, she's only 15 years old at this point, so she's not quite sure what to make of this. And at some point the experience ends. She wakes up the next morning thinking, could this have been a dream? She goes outside and looks for evidence, can't find any sign of footprints or anything. So she's really curious about it when suddenly her young cousin, who is also staying at her home, comes running out. This is at breakfast time the next morning, and they were all having coffee and donuts. And her cousin Michael wakes up, comes running into the kitchen, and looks out the window, yelling, "Did you see the clowns? The circus?" And the witness was of course shocked and wanted to ask him right away what the heck he was talking about. But she didn't want to bring up her own experience, so she just waited a few minutes and went to him after breakfast and asked him about what he said. And Michael, who was just a little kid, had no memory of what he had said or anything about clowns or anything. And there is a little strange end note to this experience. At age 39, the witness had a partial hysterectomy, and the doctor told her that there was a problem with one of her ovaries and that it didn't look good. So she connects that definitely to that early childhood experience at age 15. But what's curious here is how her cousin Michael believed he saw clowns. So what is going on here? I certainly have run across this phenomena in my own research. There was one lady I interviewed I call Marcelina. That's not her real name. She lived in Topanga Canyon, where she had a number of experiences, particularly during the Topanga Canyon UFO wave of 1992 to 1994. But as a very young girl, had an experience where she saw a gray looking in at her through the window. Except this gray was apparently dressed up as a clown, or somehow its appearance reminded her of a clown. As she says, and I'll just quote her directly, "There was this thing standing at my parents' French doors. Its face was like a whitish face. The way my mind made it look was into almost a clown-type face. It had black eyes. What I remember was there was a bush with orange flowers. What I did was I made it look like a clown because of the orange flowers near the head. I know I was awake, and me making the flowers turn into something that looked like a wig? It was exactly like a cat face without hair, with very big eyes. So I always had a fear of clowns since that time, because it was like someone looking in my window, and why is this person dressed like a clown? I was always afraid of clowns after that." That's not the only case I've run into with this weird phenomena. An even more disturbing case, and more vivid, involves a lady by the name of Laura. She's from Cicero, Illinois, where she's had a number of experiences. She had a very close-up sighting of a UFO as a little girl. Saw this object move right over her head on a very crowded street, which was strangely empty of traffic. That's something we see a lot. So she's had a number of very vivid sightings. And as an adult, her young son also started having sightings. He complained how he had this monster visiting him in his bedroom. He called it the bony crab monster. And it was really upsetting because it had a very scary appearance. And it came and it cut his finger on one occasion. But important here is this experience that Laura had as a young child. And she was initially hesitant to even tell me about it, reluctant, because she wasn't sure if it was related to her UFO experiences, but she felt that it might. And she brought it up because she was concerned about this. And here's what she says, and I'll just quote Laura directly. As she says, "I was really, really young. I don't remember how old I was exactly, but it was about 5. I just remember it didn't feel like a dream at all, and I wasn't sick, so I wasn't having one of those fever things. I just remember feeling like there was this person next to me who looked like the Joker on a deck of cards. I mean, he was white, a white face, and had this really big, toothy smile. I don't remember what his nose looked like. His eyes were kind of squinty, like on the Joker cards. He had on a whole outfit. It was velvety, and it was purple and gold. And he was bouncing up and down and making this really weird noise. And every time he bounced, I would hear this jingling. A Harlequin outfit usually has bells on it, but I noticed this one didn't have any bells on it, so I don't know why I was hearing this sound." So this is a complicated case. I wrote a whole chapter about this in my book, Extraterrestrial Visitations. And this clown visitation didn't stop there. She next found herself in a strange place. And I'll just, again, quote her directly as to what next happened with this weird alien harlequin. As Laura says, "I looked down and I could see I was naked. I could see the tops of my knees and pubic area. He disappeared around the front of me, and then I felt something. I felt something cold and wet. And I remember seeing somebody showing me a knife, like a scalpel, and then a table draped in the same kind of fabric he was wearing. I know this is stupid. I thought it was some kind of abuse thing, but I had no idea what it could have been. I felt as if it was a hidden memory. It was very clear. I can see it all now. I never lost the memory." So yeah, I do obviously think this is related. I think these ETs are dressing up as clowns in an attempt to reduce the fear factor, to come as something that they think children enjoy seeing. Clowns at the circus. I'm just speculating here that perhaps they studied our culture and this is the reason they're doing that. Hard to say, but there are some cases which speak towards that. I mean, I could march out more clown cases, but sometimes they dress up in other costumes, like cowboys. This is what happened to Anna Jamerson. Anna Jamerson is a horse farmer and a horse trainer. She lives in Central Virginia, and she has had experiences her whole life. She actually has written a book about it with her friend Anna Jamerson, who's also an experiencer. They both wrote this amazing book. It's called Connections, and I highly recommend it. It's a very vivid account of their experiences with UFOs and gray ETs, which were not particularly pleasant. At any rate, the experience important here is very interesting. What happened was Anna was driving near her home when suddenly her car died for no apparent reason, and she's stranded there on the side of the road wondering what she's going to do when suddenly a figure appears and it's walking towards her car, and she looks up and gets a real shock because it looks like a cowboy, or at least this guy is wearing a giant Stetson hat, an oversized Stetson cowboy hat. And he saunters up and asks if he can help, and opens the hood and starts looking at the engine with apparently a flashlight. And she's looking at him and starts to get confused because he does not look normal. Not only is this hat way oversized, as if his head is the size of 3 basketballs, she said, but he was wearing dark wraparound sunglasses at night, which makes no sense at all. And not only that, he had this weird fake mustache and just was sort of this stereotypical cowboy look, but was actually wearing this very tight-fitting jumpsuit. At some point, she had missing time. He disappears, the car starts, and she goes home. And it was later she realized, just how bizarre this experience was. So, as she says, she thinks that was a gray, and he probably appeared this way because she, as a horse person, might be less threatened by someone dressed up as a cowboy. As she says, my logical side, my rational side, tells me something happened to me on that road. And whoever or whatever it was thought a real good disguise to relax a horse person would be to show up as a cowboy. So I think that's probably what is going on in cases like these. But perhaps they're just simple disguises to sort of hide their presence. I mean, there's a couple of cases that do speak to that as well. There's one case which occurred in 1969 in the deserts of Southern California. This comes from a park ranger by the name of Wesley N. Horn, who wrote an article called The Alien in the Cowboy Hat. And he had encountered an old-timer who was out there in the desert who told him this encounter. So it's coming to him second-hand, but nevertheless it's still a very interesting account. And I'd just like to quote Wesley Horn briefly here. As Wesley says, "The man told me that the individuals he had encountered looked very much like we do. The most striking difference, he said, was from above their eyes to the tops of their head. In exactly what ways, I am not sure, but I believe he said that their heads were larger, possibly indicating a larger brain. For that reason, they told him, they always wore cowboy hats when they visited Earth." So, alien cowboys. Yeah, cowboys and aliens, perhaps not far off from the truth. And there are other cases where ETs seem to come dressed up in ways that are tailored to the personality of the individual. Whitley Strieber cites a case from an abductee by the name of Jo Sharp, who is a Chinese woman and very traditional. And she had a very bizarre experience where ETs came to her dressed up in wearing coolie hats. As she says, they were, quote, 3 feet tall, all of them wearing Chinese coolie hats. So perhaps this is an attempt to reduce the fear factor by appearing as something familiar. And there are other cases where ETs dress up in weird costumes. One case comes from British researcher Hilary Evans. He's a long-time researcher in this subject, and he cites the case of Glenda, a young girl from England, who was having visitations, and this ET went to these ridiculous lengths, I think, to hide the fact that it had this very large, oversized, bald head, which seems to be the one detail that really freaks people out. So what this ET did was wear a wig. As Hilary Evans writes, she realized she was not alone in the room, and with her was a strange female who she would later describe as a space woman, and who, in the drawing made of her, looks like a character from a television science fiction series. And yeah, you can see Glenda's drawing here, and it clearly shows what we would describe as the typical gray, except it's got this beautiful head of long, luxurious hair tumbling down its shoulders, and interestingly is also wearing a very colorful, loose, shiny clothes, very much like a clown. And there are other cases in which ETs will suddenly come having hair on their head, which is clearly not real. There's one case of a lady who was taken on board a craft, and she was pretty frightened, and she's standing next to these grays when suddenly one of them changes its appearance in this weird way. And as she writes, I was standing with 2 of them and noticed that they had no hair. They seemed to be smiling without moving their mouths. As soon as I thought hair, one of them seemed to produce reddish gold hair all over its head. This frightened me. So ironically, despite if the ETs are trying to reduce the fear factor, it's just causing fear to sort of escalate with a lot of these witnesses. Not surprisingly, Whitley Strieber has reported similar incidents. He had pretty much an identical experience to this, where he was taken on board a craft, and I'll just let him describe what he saw. As Strieber says, in this room with me were 4 other beings. The visitor who had come to get me was standing behind me. Sitting behind the desk was what looked to me like a man with a very, very long face, round black eyes, and a ridiculous excuse for a curly black toupee on his head. He was wearing a green plaid flannel shirt and leaning so far back in his chair that I could see he had on baggy, khaki pants and a wide belt. He looked like something from another world, wearing the clothes of the 40s. So this is very bizarre. Here we have another ET dressed up in colorful clothes and wearing a toupee. Very strange. And this is not the only time Whitley Strieber has seen something like this. He had another experience on March 15th, 1986, where he found grays surrounding his bed. He woke up, he tried to move, he could just barely move. He tried really hard to turn on the lamp, but it was like moving through molasses, he said. He finally reached the lamp and the light wouldn't work, so he turns his attention back to these figures and gets an incredible shock. And again, I will just quote him briefly here, as Whitley says, "When I turned my head back, I confronted a sight so weird, I thought afterward that I did not know how to write about it. I still don't, so I am just going to plunge ahead. beside my bed and perhaps 2 feet from my face, close enough to see it plainly without my glasses, was a version of the thin ones, the type I have called her. It was not quite right, though. Its eyes were like big black buttons, round rather than slanted. It appeared to be an inept cardboard imitation of a blue double-breasted suit, complete with a white triangle of handkerchief sticking out of the pocket. I was overcome at this point by a terror so fierce and physical that it seemed more biological than psychological. So this really stunned him. He couldn't imagine the purpose of this, and yet again, as we see in other cases, it just sort of escalated his fear. And as Whitley says, the thing before me seemed like a sort of interrogatory. Why the suit? Did it mean that they were showing me a male? And he found out, at the time he thought this was unique, but found out later that no, not unique. Other people have also reported seeing ETs appear to them dressed up in old-style suits. Again, I'll just quote Whitley briefly here. As Whitley says, I found that one of the other people I have met also had an experience involving visitors in archaic suits. This suggests that the visitors are not too interested in our clothing or are confused about its significance. Or perhaps their thought processes have not gotten very far yet in regard to clothing. It may be that if we ever meet them openly, they will not be quite as naked as the creatures who emerged in Close Encounters. Perhaps they will be wearing double-breasted suits circa 1952, complete with pocket handkerchiefs. And I know how bizarre this sounds, but there are multiple cases. Here's one case from MUFON. This occurred to a gentleman from Amsterdam, New York, and it occurred to him before he had ever heard about the Whitley Strieber case. And he was inspired to report it after seeing the movie Communion, which featured an E.T. dressed up in a suit. And this is what happened to this witness. And I'll again just quote him directly. This was in 1980. And as the witness says, out of the corner of my left eye, I saw movement at the back door. I looked and saw a 6-foot grasshopper-ish being with a tuxedo, with tails, a top hat, and a black cane with a carved bone-like top. He knocked on the back screen door. I looked back at my coffee cup in disbelief. Then I looked again, and it was still there, cocking his head. I looked away again in fear. I looked one final time, saw it was still there, and that's the last I remember. The whole event took only moments. So as bizarre as that experience sounds, I find it very credible just because there are so many other cases with this same bizarre detail. There's another case from MUFON in which a gentleman woke up and from a nightmare, he often suffered from nightmares, and woke up to see this gray standing at the foot of his bed, and again it was dressed up in one of these pinstripe suits. Very, very strange. And I certainly have run into a case like this myself. One of the witnesses who I encountered who had this experience, I wrote about her case in my latest book, or a recent book, Onboard UFO Encounters. The witness's name is Pat, and she's had experiences her whole life. In fact, as a very young girl, around age 5, she went to the circus one day, came back, and was staying at her grandparents' house, and on the second story in a bedroom, and woke up and saw something staring at her through the window. It was this weird, sort of pale face with dark eyes, and her initial thought was that something had followed them home from the circus and was peering into her window. So again, we have this weird clown motif again. But it was many years later. She had a number of missing time incidents, a number of UFO sightings. She's now an adult, and she's coming home late one evening, walks into her living room and sees 2 or 3 grays, or not your stereotypical grays, they had tan skin actually, standing in her living room. And one of them was wearing something very strange. And she had never heard of anything like this, so I'll just quote her directly. This is Pat talking. As Pat says, "They could not pass for human. One was light-colored, and the other was a lighter gray or tan. And if I tell you what it was dressed in, you're going to think I'm crazy. It was dressed in a roaring 20s kind of zoot suit. It was trying not to scare me. I looked at it, at the outfit. I knew it was projecting what it was wearing because it was trying not to scare me." So in her case, it did seem to work to reduce the fear factor. But in most cases, no. I don't think it works. I did a study of these types of cases in my book, Not From Here, Volume 1, and wrote about this weird alien-clown connection. There's no denying it takes place. There's far too many cases. I wrote this article, and I still don't quite understand what's going on here. Could this be a screen memory? Where as ET's appearing perhaps as owls or deer. I've run into a number of cases with all kinds of screen memories. One lady, she would describe 3-foot-tall teddy bears. Other people have told me of being dressed up as Barbie or as superheroes, or all kinds of screen memories of vampires and monsters and what have you. But I'm wondering if in these cases they are actually wearing, wigs, actually putting on cowboy hats or clown costumes complete with makeup. It's hard to say, and we really don't know exactly why they're doing this. It could be to test our emotional reactions. It could be to disguise their identity. But ultimately, I do think that they're coming dressed in this way in an attempt to reduce the fear factor. And I say this because of the cases in which they come dressed up pertaining to that particular person's personality, as with Anna Jamerson in the Cowboy incident, or Joe Sharp and the Chinese coolies. So I'm thinking they think that children love clowns. I know, let's come up dressed as a clown, and perhaps the kids won't fear us. So if that's their intention, it has not worked very well, because ultimately what it does is it just scares the kids even more. And I find it very interesting that there is now a very widespread fear of clowns in our society. That's called coulrophobia, and a lot of people have it. In fact, I once went to a UFO support group, and knowing about these types of cases, I brought it up. I said, "Does anyone here have a fear of clowns?" It's like setting off an atom bomb. All of them started screaming and jumping up and going, "Oh my God, yes, yes, yes." And it was pretty much universal. None of them liked clowns at all. And I see this in people sometimes. I've seen people who have such a fear of clowns that they will pass out if they see a clown, or just start screaming and running away in terror. So this is now one of the questions I ask people who I suspect of having encounters. How do you feel about clowns? Do you have coulrophobia? Because it's very prominent within the abductee factor. So, this is what I definitely think is happening here. I think they are dressing up as clowns to reduce the fear factor, and ultimately it hasn't worked. So this definitely is related to the screen memory phenomena, I think, except for the fact that they might be physically dressing up this way. So as Whitley Strieber says, don't be surprised if an ET comes dressed up wearing a toupee or a suit or something really bizarre. Because as you can see, these cases happen pretty consistently. So for that reason, I think it's important that people know. And that's why I put together this video. And that's it. That's it for now. Thanks once again for listening and keep having fun.